Hello everybody! Today we're going to be installing this Legend AXEO suspension on the Indian Scout. So to start off, we got to kick up the bike. So go ahead and slide this under. And we're really focused on just elevating the front, so we're not going to try and get the whole bike up. So just be a bit careful on this, try to keep the bike balanced, and you just want to get it up high enough to where you can have it sit, while also having the front wheel be just slightly elevated off the ground. So as you can see now, bike front tire is freely off the ground, shocks are fully extended, and we can get started. So tools that you're going to need a T40 to be able to take off the fender and to take off this bolt hidden down here. And then you are also going to need a 16mm hex bolt to be able to get the wheel off. To take the brake caliper off, before we can get the front wheel off, you will need a T50 for these two bolts up here. And then for the ABS sensor, if you have ABS on your bike, you will need a T30. We're gonna go ahead and start taking off all of these screws. Keep in mind, when you do take off the brake caliper, you don't wanna let it hang, so you wanna have it be secured somewhere, so something is supporting the weight of the caliper. You don't wanna let the lines be pulled and have that constant weight be hanging. All right, let's go ahead and start with getting the ABS sensor loosened. And now let's get the brake calipers off. Now when I get the caliper off, I have a bag off to the side, just a little one of those athletic string bags, I don't know what to call them, hanging by my handlebars, so I'm going to have the caliper sitting there. Now the caliper should just slide right out, just like that. Then we're just going to put the caliper, have it sit in the bag. As I'm pulling these screws out, I am supporting the fender, just so the screws don't get unnecessary tension on them, and so the fender doesn't just fall out as soon as these are all out. There we go. Alright, so next we're going to get off this bolt down here. Again, this is also using the same T40 as the other screws. Now, let's take off the wheel. Again, this is going to be your 16mm. There we go. Pull this out. Then out comes the tire. Alright, so now that we have the front wheel off, the next step is we're going to have to take out the forks. So because I have a Memphis Shades fairing and I have the trigger locking mechanism here, so I got to take these off, and then we're going to go ahead and loosen up the bolts up here and be able to slowly pull out a fork. So I actually don't know what sizes these are, but I was able to grab one of the many Allen keys I have, and this one seems to work. I highly recommend you get an Allen key set, so that way you're just going to have a variety on hand. And as I'm going through, I'm just keeping all the necessary tools with the parts in their various locations. So all the tools that go on the left, or all the parts that go on the left-hand side, I'm keeping it off to the left. All the parts that go on the right-hand side, keeping it to the right, just so I don't have to figure it out down the line again. So again, for these, we're going to get our T40. Go ahead and start working on those. So if you also have the turn signal relocator, also uses a T40. so you can twist and just pull down. Just be cognizant since you're balancing the bike on the stand. Don't fall too forward. Don't yank it forward and then have the bike just lose balance. Whew, I'm sweating. You know what, it might also help if we clean it off, so maybe let's get a little bit of water, spray it down. The dirt and grime, I'm sure, is not making it any easier. My bike is dirty. Okay, let's try this again. Yeah, I think just cleaning it off really helps. Turn one way, doesn't work. Start turning counterclockwise. Whew. Front shock is almost all the way out. Want to be careful when you're pulling, it doesn't give way, because I'm pretty close to the ground right now. I only have probably 5 inches of clearance from the bottom of the shock to the floor. So I want to be careful. I'm yanking and pulling. It's still controlled, so when it gives, I don't just jam the shock into the ground. I can stick something in there. There we go. Just stuck a little spanner in there just to give a little bit more leeway. And there we have our first shock off. Ooh, yeah, it's dirty in there. I'm wondering if all that grime is what was holding this up. So, now we just gotta do the same thing on the other side. Woo! This is a workout. So now that we have the forks off of the bike, the next step is to get that little bolt that you can see right in there, get that out. Now, I had to use a extender, so this is a 8mm. So go ahead and put that in and go ahead and break this. And then from other videos I've seen, namely with Dad on a Bike, you gotta put some pressure on the fork itself, otherwise it's just gonna keep spinning. So you have to push it down to continuously, after you break the seal, to be able to get out that bolt. And then once you flip it upside down, I'm going to go ahead and put it back into the triple tree and then start to let it drain. There we go. So it looks like, okay, so the bolt came out. See, we have the bolt, copper washer. So we need to save this, so make sure you don't throw this out or lose that washer. Where's that spanner? There it goes. So now that we have it back in the triple tree, here, there it goes. Seems to be splashing quite a bit. So the next step is to get the old spring and cartridge out of the shock. What you'll need is a size 30, snap on like that. And this is where it's gonna be a little difficult because I have a feeling this is gonna be really hard to get off without a proper housing. And I might have to put this back into the triple tree to have enough leverage to be able to get this off, but we'll see. We'll give this a shot. It also doesn't help that my hands are covered in oil, so that also makes things a tiny bit more difficult. So yeah, I think we're just gonna have to put this back into the triple tree. I don't think there's any way I'm gonna have enough leverage. All right, so we have the fork back onto the triple tree. I did put one of the screws back in just to give us a little bit more leverage. So let's see what we can do here. Oh God. This is clearly not working, and I'm just really afraid I'm gonna break something. And this is gonna turn into a much bigger project than I anticipated.
One eternity later.
All right, so I was finally able to get the bolt off. I can pull it out. You can see the spring in there. I had to use the impact gun, and I really had to put it through its paces. Like, I was holding it on there. Whole house was vibrating. Everything was going on to that bolt. So it broke loose finally. So gotta use an impact gun on this apparently. All that's left is to do the other side. And whew, I mean, you can see how many things I was attempting to do. Like, this bolt is beat up now. So lesson learned, just start with the impact gun. Make your life easy. Oh, that went right on my foot. So now we've used the impact gun on both of the forks. Finally being able to screw this all off. Pull out the spring. You see the cartridge. And that little bottom piece is what we are after. So this is the piece that, see, this comes right off. So these are going to be what we put on the new suspension. So I'm just going to go ahead and clean these off, get everything prepped, and reinstall. So for the new shocks, you'll see here Legend Performance. The way you're going to adjust it is you're going to use an Allen bolt to pull this out, and then you're going to go ahead and twist it. And you'll notice in here, there's going to be one part of the screw that has been flattened. That is going to be where you're going to tighten down the bolt. The instructions are a little bit confusing when you read them at first, but then once you take a look at the shock itself, you'll notice this part right here is flattened, which aligns with where the bolt is. They come starting at 0, and as you can see here from the chart, they recommend 0 with a rider with gear for 100 to 250 pounds. So I'm going to leave it at 0 since that's the way they come. I'm not going to go up a level. I don't think I really need to. One thing that you do need to keep in mind is even if you are going to be using a passenger, that really applies more for the rear shocks than it does for the front shocks, unless you're going to be doing stuff like emergency braking, where all of the force is going to be put onto the front shocks. So your passenger weight doesn't actually matter too much on this. So that was something I learned and wanted to share. So with that, we're going to go ahead and put this on to the new shock and get those into the forks. So you'll see it slides on just like that. Here we have our fork, and we just go ahead and place the new shock. That part is going to fall down to the bottom. That's okay. Just down slowly. Just make sure everything is seated properly. Yep, it feels right. And then the next step is to grab our old bolt that goes into the bottom. So you recognize this one. This one has the copper washer on it. We're going to go ahead and put some Loctite and secure the shock to the fork. So you see there, it needs to be seated correctly. So have it go all the way in. Make sure it starts to get threaded. So now we'll go ahead and do that for both sides. One thing I do want to mention that I did forget to mention earlier, you're going to want to clean this out. I recently got the seals and everything else replaced at the 10,000 mile service. They were starting to leak, so all of the seals in these shocks are about 1,000 miles old, so I will not be replacing these. So do make sure you clean out everything, and this is also a great time to inspect if you do need to replace any seals or anything along those lines. I need to go back and double check this, so I'll put a note up here. But watching other videos, they mentioned that the torque spec on this is 15 foot-pounds of torque. So we might need to put this back on the triple tree just to make sure that everything is torqued down to spec, because I don't know if I can really get enough leverage on this to get to the proper torque spec by hand without having a proper brace or anything. So we might just need to remember to do that once we get everything back on the bike. Yeah, I think we're gonna have to do that back on the bike. One thing to also keep in mind, make sure you mount the right shock on the right side. I didn't even think about it, and then it occurred to me, wait, do I even have the right shock on the right side? So if you forget which shock is supposed to go where, you can always remember the left-hand side is going to have more bolts for the brake piston. So again, left-hand side, it's going to have these 2 extra ones. Right-hand side, it's just going to have the 2 bolts to mount the fairing. So that's an easy way to tell, and make sure you get the right shock on the right side, because you don't want to go through all this again realizing you mounted the wrong side. So getting the forks back onto the triple tree, that's required a bit of force. So that's where we are. We're going to go ahead and make sure that the bottom bolts are the 15 pounds or whatever else it's supposed to be. Again, if there's something different, I'll put it up here. But then next step will be to put oil in here. So according to the instructions, we need about 2.5 ounces of oil. So to measure the oil, I took the advice of Dad on a Bike, got myself a syringe. So 2.5 US ounces is about 74 milliliters. I'm gonna go ahead and round it up to 75. So we're gonna go ahead and fill this up with our fork oil and go from there. All right, so we have our 2.5 ounces of oil. I'm just gonna go ahead and put this onto the cartridge very, very slowly. And the syringe will help us to make sure that everything gets coated pretty evenly, reduce the amount of spillage, and to make sure we put the proper amount in. I'm doing it in little short bursts. As I can see, there's like little pockets of air that are coming up. So as it'll start to, oh, looks like I'm spilling. So clearly I'm going a little too fast. So that's why we round up a little bit, just to account for any spilling we may get. Yeah, each time I'm still putting in like maybe 5 mil at a time, and then it'll fill up. Move it down a little bit, put more in, see it reach the top, pull it down. I don't even know if this is really the right way to do it, but so we've probably lost a few mil, I would estimate. All right, so we'll do that again on the other side. I'll put a few more mil in there just to make sure we got everything, and then tighten it all back up. Now we're gonna go ahead and try and torque down the end cap. So we don't need the old caps from the previous shocks. So obviously these are still stuck on here. So we don't need to reuse these at all. So we're just gonna tighten this down. Now, because there is a little bit of oil that seeped into here, if I try and torque this down, the whole shock is just gonna spin. So I'm gonna go ahead and tighten down the screw over here so it will properly secure the shock. Using, again, Dad with the Bike, using his video as reference, it is 25 foot-pounds. So we get our torque wrench and our 30 millimeter cap and tighten this down. Then just repeat that process on the other side. Then we'll loosen up the screws, put up the shocks all the way to where they're supposed to be, and mount everything back up. All right, so we have the forks back up. Wasn't quite sure how high they should go, but I've raised them so that way when I clamp them down, it's gonna be holding onto the fork itself and not gonna be clamping down onto this cap. So there's a tiny little bit of a lip here, but you know, according to the other videos I've seen, this should be flush. And I conceptually understand what that means, but I wasn't sure exactly if that means it should be flush with the top up here, or if it should be flush with the inner lip down here. So it's within a centimeter, if that, of difference. So take that for what it is, but I'm thinking it should be clamping down onto the fork itself and not really putting too much pressure onto the cap. So that was the logic I did. Secondary thing, do not hit your brake lever like I did. because the brake caliper is off, if you push in the brake caliper, it's going to push in the pistons. So I'm really hoping I didn't just screw myself by accidentally bumping into this and pushing it in all the way. I'm really hoping the pistons are still outward to where I can push them back out again. Because if this got pushed in all the way and the brakes are all the way down, then I think we're going to have to rebuild those, and I have no idea how to do that. So I'm really hoping I didn't just screw myself. So be careful. All that's left is to retighten all of the bolts on the triple tree and reattach the fender. So this is where I give a plug for if you do not have the service manual for your bike, I highly recommend to have it. It's going to give you all of the torque specifications that you need. So I went back and took a look. So the nice thing is for the fender and for the triple tree clamps, bolts to tighten down the triple tree, I should say, these are all 18 foot-pounds of torque. And then for the brake caliper on the other side, those are going to be 35 foot-pounds of torque. And then for the ABS, it's 84 inches. So let's go ahead and get everything back on. And then I also need to look up how to tighten the wheel back down. So we'll go do that after we get everything back on and tightened. And then now we got to do the pinch bolt, which is going to be, again, 18 pounds. And then we have the axle, which is going to be 52 pounds of torque. And I did put Loctite on here. So you can assume that everything has Loctite back on it. Okay, that's 18. Now let's go ahead and change our wrench to be 52 pounds. I may have made a mistake because I already lowered the bike, so that's probably putting too much pressure on it already. So I think I have to raise the bike back up to relieve that pressure to make sure I can tighten it down again. Okay, now let's try this again. Oh, okay, didn't make a difference. All right, so that's all tightened down. Now we should be done. All that's left is to really, I guess technically put the fairing back on, but let's go ahead and test out the suspension. So it's back on the floor, everything's tightened down. Oh, that's so much firmer. I'm putting like all my weight onto it as much as I can, and it is squeaking a bit. Don't know why that's happening. Maybe that'll go away in time. Maybe this is because there's fork oil everywhere. And I haven't necessarily cleaned off everything yet, so maybe that has something to do with it. Hopefully that'll go away. But, oh my god, it's so much stiffer than before. Oh, and by the way, I was able to not entirely screw myself by pushing in the brake. I was able to push the pistons back out, so the brake pads were pushed in quite a bit. Luckily I had just enough space to be able to fit in my fingers to be able to push the pistons back out, so I did not completely screw myself, so I got lucky there. So alright everybody, so all that's left is to put on the trigger lock mechanism for the Memphis Shades fairing, and then we're pretty much done. But as far as the install of the Legend front-end suspension, this is done. This has been a bit of a tedious job. One thing I did not mention before was Legend did not send fork oil. I had to go out and buy fork oil myself. There were no open shops that had it in stock. So I had to order it, pick it up the next day. So if you do buy the suspension, double check to make sure that you do get fork oil. That was something that did slip my mind. But all in all, you know, I did have to buy some additional tools for this, the fork oil. But otherwise, this was a fun install, not something I had really ever done before. I think this was really kind of my first time going into the internals of the bike, quote unquote. Beyond that, I hadn't really done anything like this before. So hopefully this works out. I'll do a ride review after I get about 1,000 miles in with these with this new suspension and give a full-on review. So that was the install. Hope this helped out. Again, big shout out to Dad on a Bike. His video was tremendously helpful and I think much better than mine. So I do recommend go check out his channel, do follow him, subscribe to him, support him. He's an awesome dude and he does great quality content. So I leveraged a lot of his video in this one. Again, he has a bobber, I have a regular Scout. Don't think there's any really major differences there, but definitely wanted to give credit where credit is due. All right, everybody, as always, be brave, do good, take care of yourselves. We'll see you in the next one. Have a great day.